Gallery experience. Why some bad paintings become famous. Have you ever stood in front of a famous painting and thought, why is this considered great art? Maybe you don't understand it. Maybe you don't like the colors. Maybe you think you could paint something better. And yet, people have traveled across the world just to stand in front of it. Collectors may pay millions for works by certain artists. Museums protect them. Art historians study them. And generations of people continue to talk about them. So, what makes a painting famous? And can a painting that looks bad actually become great art? Let's start with something uncomfortable. Beauty and artistic importance are not always the same thing. A painting can be beautiful and still have very little historical influence. Another painting can look strange, disturbing, unfinished, or even ugly, and still completely change the way people think about art. This is one of the most confusing things about the art world. We often assume that good art means beautiful art, but artists have never agreed on that definition. Throughout history, artists have deliberately challenged ideas of beauty. They distorted the human body. They used unusual colors. They simplified forms. They left parts of paintings unfinished. They painted ordinary people. They painted disturbing subjects. They rejected traditional techniques. And sometimes audiences hated their work at first. Then something changed. People began to understand what the artist was trying to do. Or perhaps the artist's work influenced other artists. And eventually, the work became part of art history. This is one reason a painting's historical context matters. Imagine seeing an unusual painting without knowing when it was created. You might think, that doesn't look very impressive. But then you learn that the painting was created at a time when artists were expected to follow completely different rules. Suddenly, the painting becomes more interesting. The artist wasn't simply making an unusual picture.
They were challenging the rules of their time.
And that can be extremely important. Art is not created in a vacuum. Every artist is responding to something. Another artist, another movement, a political moment, a cultural change, a technological invention, a personal experience, or simply the world around them. Sometimes the most important thing about a painting is not how it looks. It is what it changed.
Think about this.
If an artist creates a strange painting and nobody follows them, perhaps the work remains an unusual experiment. But if hundreds of artists begin working differently because of that artist, now we're talking about influence. Influence is one of the things that can turn an artwork into a landmark. But there is another factor.
Fame.
Once an artist becomes famous, the value of their work can change dramatically. This is where the art market becomes complicated. A painting by an unknown artist might be worth a few $100s. The same quality of painting by a famous artist might sell for millions.
Why?
Because buyers aren't paying only for the paint on the canvas. They are paying for the artist's name, the history of the artwork, its rarity, its ownership history, its cultural importance, its place in the artist's career, and sometimes simply the opportunity to own something extremely rare. Imagine there are only a few major works by a particular artist available in private hands. Demand is high. Supply is tiny. Prices can rise dramatically. This doesn't necessarily mean that the painting suddenly became better. Its cultural and market value changed. And that brings us to another important question. Who decides what is great art? Museums? Curators? Collectors? Critics? Art historians? Artists? The public? The answer is complicated. All of them can influence the conversation. A museum exhibition can introduce an artist to millions of people. A critic can change how people interpret an artist. A collector can bring attention and money. A university can establish an artist as an important subject of study. And sometimes the public decides. An artwork becomes so memorable that people continue talking about it. This is why the art world is not simply a competition for the prettiest painting. It is a conversation, and that conversation changes over time. An artist who is ignored during their lifetime may become highly respected later. Another artist who is extremely popular may eventually disappear from public attention. Art history is constantly being rewritten. This also explains why some paintings that seem bad to us can become famous. Perhaps they represent an important turning point. Perhaps they challenged traditional ideas. Perhaps they introduced a new technique. Perhaps they captured a historical moment. Perhaps they influenced generations of artists. Or perhaps they became symbols of something much larger than the painting itself. And sometimes, the story behind the artwork becomes almost as famous as the artwork. People love stories. Who created it?
Why? When?
Under what circumstances?
Who owned it?
How did it become famous? Was it controversial? Was it rejected? Was it misunderstood? These stories give artwork another layer of meaning. Now, let's consider something even more personal. You don't have to agree with the art world. You are allowed to dislike a famous painting. You are allowed to think it is ugly.
You are allowed to say,
I don't understand why this is important. That doesn't make you ignorant. In fact, questioning art can be part of experiencing art. The goal isn't always to agree with the museum label. The goal is to look,
think,
question, and decide what you feel. But before dismissing a famous artwork, try asking one more question. What did this artist change? That question can completely change the experience. Maybe you still won't like the painting. That's okay. But you may begin to understand why it matters. And perhaps that is the difference between saying, this is a bad painting, and saying, I don't personally like this painting, but I understand why it became important. Those are very different judgments. Art doesn't have to please everyone. Sometimes its job is to challenge us. Sometimes it changes the language of art. Sometimes it opens a door that other artists walk through later. And sometimes it simply becomes famous because people cannot stop talking about it. So the next time you stand in front of a famous painting and think, I could do better than that, don't be afraid to ask yourself, maybe, but what did this artist do that changed the conversation? Because great art is not always the most beautiful art, and famous art is not always the most beautiful art. Sometimes its power comes from something much deeper, the ability to make people stop,
look,
argue, question,
feel.
And remember, perhaps that is the real secret. A painting doesn't have to make everyone say, that's beautiful. Sometimes it only has to make everyone say, why? And once people start asking why, the conversation has already begun. This is the gallery experience.